Hey guys, this week I'm going to talk about some things you can do to help make running a game online a lot smoother. Some of the things I'll talk about will be transferable to any system or virtual tabletop, and then the second half of the video will pretty much be specific to Roll20 since that's the one that I use. But stick around if you use something else, because for the first half of the video there should be some useful information for you. So, one of the best things that you can do to help make your game run smoother is to have references of information that the players are going to need. I either open up the references in other tabs on my browser or I keep them in separate windows on my desktop. It's kind of clumsy if you have physical references and you're constantly fumbling around for your copy of the player's handbook or the Dungeon Master's Guide, when a lot of the things that you're going to need from there are easily accessible online and you can just pull up another tab and find it super quickly. So these are the references that I use the most often. Maps. If you're running a game where your players have the freedom to go pretty much anywhere that they want to, you're going to need a map in order to see where your players are or where specific locations are. It's really good to have this reference. It kind of helps you wrap your head around where everything's taking place in the game. If you're playing in a world that's already been published, like Faerun or Eberron, you should be able to find maps online. If you're playing in a homebrew world, you can take advantage of some of the free map creation tools online. I used Incarnate to make this map of my world. Since I have the original image on my desktop, I just pull this one up in a separate window. Places of interest. When your party arrives in a new town, it's really handy to have a list of places that they're probably going to visit. Things like the tavern, the inn, blacksmiths, general stores, grocers, or official buildings like the governor's office or the jail. You don't need to go overboard in prepping this stuff. Just having a list of common buildings that are in any town is going to be really useful. And if you're trying to point out features to them, maybe you make a short list of buildings and just say, oh, you see this, this, and this on the main street. And then they kind of have some reference of the things that they're able to do in this town. Obviously, if they're looking for a specific building that you didn't mention, if it makes sense for it to be in the town, throw it in, make up a name for it or whatever. But having a small list of core buildings will be really helpful. In most pre-written modules, these lists will already be available. For instance, in the Lost Mine of Phandelver in the starter kit, Phandalin is the central hub. I did a quick Google search and found an entry on Phandalin on the Crossgoers D&D wiki. At the bottom of the page, there's a list of all the different buildings that you can visit. I'm not sure how many other pre-written places have these lists, but I'm sure plenty of them do. Names of NPCs. Along with your list of common buildings, you're going to want a short list of NPCs' names that the players are probably going to encounter. Having these names already written down will take a lot of the hemming and hawing out of it. I'm pretty bad for that. When somebody asks me an NPC's name and I haven't thought of one yet, then it takes me a few minutes to kind of come up with something. Maybe not a few minutes, but uncomfortably long amounts of time. Obviously, don't go naming everyone in the town, because chances are the party's probably not going to encounter most of them. But having kind of the core ones like the barkeeper, the innkeeper, and the sheriff, or the names of any NPCs that you plan to introduce to the party in that town, that'll help make things a lot smoother. Another tip that I picked up from Matt Mercer is to have a list of NPC names. And when the party encounters somebody that you don't have a name for, you can just take a look at the list, cross it off, and then make a note of where they found that NPC for future reference. I have mine all written up on a spreadsheet, and I also printed it out for my live games. Item lists. Having a list of common items that the players will be able to find in the general store or other shops will really help to give you a little bit more flavor to the shops and merchants that they encounter. And it also helps you be able to price things better. The Basic Rules has a list of common items in the Adventuring Gear section, and a lot of these should be easily found in a general store or other shops. Another thing you might want to write down is a list of loot items that the players can find in a dungeon. I usually write this down on the GM layer when I'm playing in Roll20, but you can just write it down on a sheet of paper or on WordPad so you don't forget to reward your players while they're spelunking. Okay, that's all the kind of general information that I have for you guys. Now let's get into some of the more Roll20 specific stuff. Here's the list of things that I'm going to cover in this section. The GM layer. In Roll20, there are 3 layers that you can put images and tokens on. The background layer is mostly for stuff that you won't interact with, but that you want there for the visuals. The token layer is the layer that you interact with the most, and primarily you keep the player and monster tokens on. The GM layer is visible to the GM, but not the players. I mostly keep hidden tokens and notes on the GM layer. It's really useful for things like traps, hidden features, stealth monsters, or whatever else you don't want the players to be able to see right away. An example of this is if you have a hidden door in your dungeon. Say the DC to find it is 16. So if your player is investigating the room and rolls an investigation check of 16 or higher, you can tell them that they found a hidden door. In order to not forget, you can just make a note on the GM layer and the players won't be able to see it. Another thing you can do is to put a monster token on the GM layer when you have a monster that's hidden. You can see the monster and control his stats and all that, but the players can't see it. To move it to the token layer so the players can see, you just right-click on it and select Token Layer from the list. Remember, if you can't select the token, it's because you're on the wrong layer. Macros. Macros are one of the most useful features of Roll20, and I believe most virtual tabletops use them as well. But the ones that I'm going to teach you are going to be specific to Roll20, so they won't work on like Fantasy Grounds or other virtual tabletops. Macros are essentially just scripts that automatically get put into the chat when you press the macro button. Since the chat is used for rolling dice, macros can be used to automate things like attack rolls, skill checks, and all sorts of other things. For example, let's say I want to put this into the chat when I make a longsword attack. I can add my attack and damage modifiers to the dice formula if I type them this way. Now I'll copy that before entering it. When I enter it, it uses the double square brackets to roll the dice formula automatically, which you can see when you mouse over the numbers. Now I'll make a new macro and paste the text that I entered before. I'll make that a token action, so that when I select my character, the macro comes up at the top. When I click on it, it automatically enters the same text into the chat, so I don't have to type it out every time I want to make a longsword attack. I am going to be making a more in-depth video just about macros, but in this video I'm just going to be talking about the ones that I use as a GM and why I set them up the way I do. First, let's just quickly address the template that I'm using. I use the D&D 5th edition character sheet by Roll20 for my Roll20 games. That comes with a template to make your rolls look pretty. I'll be providing the macros that I use in a link in the description. If you try to copy these to a game that's not using the 5th edition character sheet by Roll20, these macros won't work. In the more in-depth video, I'll be teaching you how the macros work and why, so you can edit them to make them work for whatever character sheet you're using, or if you're just using the default Roll20 system. The default system does come with a template to make them look a little prettier as well. That looks like this. And that template should always work regardless of which character sheet you're using or if you're not even using one at all. With all that aside, let's talk about which macros I use. I have a list of universal macros that are for both myself and the players. These I program into the macro list in the Collections tab, and then make them available for all players. If you don't see them at the bottom, make sure that you check Show Macro Quickbar. The universal macros are Initiative, Skill Check, Ability Check, Saving Throw, and Unarmed Strike. As long as the token that I'm rolling for is selected, these macros will roll using that token's stats. If you try to roll one without selecting a token, it'll give you this error message. So first is Initiative. This macro will roll a d20 and add the selected token's initiative bonus, and then add that token and the number rolled to the turn tracker automatically. The Skill Check macro will ask if you're rolling with advantage, and you can choose normal, advantage, or disadvantage from the drop-down list. Then it will ask which skill you're rolling for, and you can choose that from the drop-down list. When it rolls, it will automatically add that token's skill bonus to a d20 roll and show you the number you got. And it takes skill proficiency into account as well. The ability check is the same as the skill check, but it will just use your regular ability modifiers with no proficiency bonuses. The saving throw does the same again, but it will add your saving throw bonus, so it will factor in proficiency like it does for the skill check. The unarmed strike is not really necessary, but it is useful if you forget how to calculate it. All it is a d20 plus your strength and proficiency modifiers, If it hits, it deals 1 damage plus your strength modifier. The macro automatically rolls and calculates the damage for the selected token. As you can see, the same macro uses different modifiers for different tokens. If you want to use these macros, copy and paste them into your macro list. There's one thing you have to be really careful of though. In order for these to work, I had to use the HTML equivalent of a closed curly bracket in several places. If you close this macro, it will convert those to the actual bracket. But if you edit the macro in any way after you initially make it, it will break. And you'll have to re-enter it from the original source. The reason I call these universal macros is that they work for both the players and any NPCs that you select. All of the role modifiers will automatically be changed to reflect the character sheet of the token you have selected. Because of that, you don't have to change your macro when you update your character sheet. It will automatically take changes into account. Interface shortcuts. There are a large number of really useful interface shortcuts, and I don't know half of them. I also forget to use half of the ones that I do know, but I will try to cover all the really useful ones that I try to use as much as I can in this video. If you hold Shift and double click on a token, it opens up their character sheet. This is really useful if you don't want to keep going to another tab to open up a character sheet, or if you don't want to keep a bunch of character sheets open and in the way. You can double click on the window to minimize it. This is great for if you need to access a character sheet often, or if you're copying and pasting stuff between windows. You can right click with the mouse and drag the view around. You can hold the left mouse button down to ping. When you do that, everyone can see your ping, so it's easier to show where you're talking about or which monster you're targeting or what have you. If you hold Shift down while you ping, that'll move all the players' views to where you're pinging. If you do this on the GM layer, only your view will move. There's some shortcuts for switching between layers. If you're using the GM layer to hide monster tokens, you'll have to switch layers to control them. Control O moves you to the token layer. Control M is the map layer, and Control K is the GM layer. Some of the shortcuts are listed in this shortcut list, so go over them if you want to learn all of them. Most of the ones I'm talking about aren't in that list though. When you're resizing something, such as a background or token, it'll automatically keep its aspect ratio. You can hold Shift while resizing it if you want it to deform. If the grid's enabled, things will automatically snap to it. If you don't want them to, you can hold Alt while resizing, moving, or rotating them. Also, when you drag something out of the library, it automatically scales to a certain size to fit inside the grid. If you hold Alt while dragging them from the library, they'll be at their native size instead. Holding Shift will force things to snap to the grid. This is useful for things like the Drawing tool and the Fog of War tools. If you're using the Draw Shape tool, you can hold Alt to draw an oval instead of a rectangle. Holding Shift and Alt will make it snap to a grid, which is really useful for making like a perfect circle. Drawing circles and squares are a great way to make spell templates to show area effects. If you need a cone, you can use the Polygon tool to make one easily. You can snap that to the grid as well, but it will snap to the corner of the square, so you can't do that for the first point. After you've drawn a template, you can still move it, resize it, and rotate it. I've made custom templates and made them into characters that all the players can edit. That way they can just drag out the template they need, and I can scale it for them. Then they can put it wherever they want. Unfortunately, there's no way to allow the players to scale the tokens themselves. I've looked into it, but I think it's impossible with the free version. I'll include the templates that I made with the macros so that you can use them too if you want. If you're giving a player some new equipment, you can search for it in the compendium and then just drag it onto their character sheet and it will add it automatically. If it's a weapon, it'll also automatically add that attack into the weapons section. The players can also do it themselves if you don't want to bother. If you want to, you can add values to the bubbles over the tokens. These can represent anything you want. Personally, I use the green bubble for health and the blue for armor class. Another good use is to put the spellcasting DC in one of them. You can simply add the value from the drop-down list as well, and it will automatically put the correct number in. For some reason, the players can use the AC variable, but NPCs have to use the NPC AC, or else it will be incorrect. Alright, that's it for this video. I could go on, but I just wanted to keep this video somewhat concise and give you some of the information that really helps me in speeding up my games online. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.